earlier this year, Google made some significant changes to their search algorithms. They introduced what's now called the Core Web Vitals, which, although it kind of delayed in launch due to the pandemic, it has now been rolled out worldwide. So it's something we can start planning for and making full use of. The name itself might make it sound a little bit scary, but mostly what it does is reinforce best practice guidelines that have been around for some time, but also introducing some new things. A lot of it will be for developers to really focus in on, but it's something for all business managers and every kind of aspect of a business to be aware of. Marketing, of course, overseeing that. So a lot of the Web Vitals will focus on ensuring that visitors are provided with the best possible and safest experience while they browse. And that kind of matches the behavior that we've seen earlier on, where customers are very aware of security. They're very aware of having safe data and browsing safe websites. So Google just want to reinforce that and rank some websites higher that are meeting all these benchmarks. It is worth noting, though, that even if your website is meeting Core Web Vitals, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to skyrocket to the top. And similarly, if you're not quite meeting it, you're not going to plummet in rankings. This will be quite a gradual thing. And there will be other factors, of course. Your site content is still a very big influencing factor. So don't just rely on meeting Core Web Vitals and ignoring everything else. It is important to bring the whole thing together. The key points from the Core Web Vitals update can mainly be grouped into 3 big sections. So these are load speed, mobile friendliness, and safety and security. So if we take each one in turn, load speed is for mobile and desktop speeds. So it does incorporate both. There's 3 almost subheadings within that. So if you're looking into the Core Web Vitals search tool on Webmaster Tools on Google, you'll see these popping up. So there's one called Largest Contentful Paint. And this is the above the fold content. So it's when users immediately go into your website, the very first thing they see. And what Google is recommending is that if you display that first and then load the rest of the page once the user has scrolled to it, what's known as lazy loading. This will speed up the experience for the users. They'll be able to see the largest content kind of header area first and be able to interact with that. And then if they want to scroll down further, that's when that data should roll in. So that just makes the website load a bit faster on mobile devices as well. Best practice to do that. There's also the first input delay, which is linked to it. So this would be once your website is loading and a user wants to click on a button or wants to navigate to another page, that's the time delay that it takes for that action to actually happen. On some websites, they're optimized for desktop only. That experience can be quite slow on mobile. So it's just taking the experience from both and making sure that all users, regardless of device, can interact with your website as quickly as possible. And the last measure is the cumulative layout shift. So this is any kind of unexpected element shifts around the page just while it's still loading. So it's not your animations, but it's whether there's any kind of bugs in the code that will slow it down and perhaps move elements around, making them harder to click on. Anything like that can turn a customer away. So it is just something to bear in mind and look at the reports as well from Google and see how your website performs for each of those. Research has shown that if a user goes onto a site that takes too long to load, over 40% of users will click away if it takes more than 3 seconds. So it is important to keep up benchmarks for all devices, like I say. It is also something that a lot of people now, if they're browsing on the go, they maybe don't have the fastest internet on the go. They want something very quickly. So that's another aspect to think about. With 5G rollout, that could change slightly and you could have the higher speeds in more areas. But it is just something to note that on the go, people want information very, very quickly, and Google wants to help them get that as quickly as possible. Another way I was going to mention, the Webmaster Tools. The tool itself is called the Page Speed Insights. It has recently had an overhaul to match the Core Web Vitals update. So it does go a little more in depth and also tells you on the page directly if you now pass or fail Core Web Vitals. I've used it myself a couple of times now, and I have noticed that some sites that can rate very highly for speed alone can still fail Core Web Vitals. So it is just important, again, just to consider the full picture and look at the rest of the metrics. The report will tell you what problems are present and how you can fix them. It can also recommend things like plugins, but we do still recommend chatting to a developer like ourselves because some of the plugins might still need quite a bit of technical bits at the end, just when you're installing them. And sometimes that can conflict with other aspects of your page and your site overall. So you don't want to break anything adding a plugin. You want to enhance. So it is just good to chat to a developer if you've got one in-house, or if you don't. Certainly we do a lot of this type of consultancy with our own clients, so we'd be more than happy to help. Going into the next category is mobile friendliness. So this obviously links quite closely to what we've chatted about, page speed, but it also encompasses how content itself appears on mobile, especially things like mobile URLs. How easy is it to type out a URL is probably quite a good measure of whether or not it is or isn't mobile friendly. If you've got kind of long chains of subpages or loads of non-alphanumeric characters in the URL, that can make it less mobile friendly. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're generating new pages for your site. And lastly, there is the safety and security aspect to it. So a lot of modern websites will use things like HTTPS as standard, but if your website is one that doesn't, it is important to get that extra layer of protection. It does also reduce the chance of your site getting hacked and users' details being leaked. As we saw, again, users want to have their data be in a protected space. And they want to know how their data is being shared and used. So having these extra layers of protection will help reinforce the messaging that your website is a secure site to be on. If you're at any point unsure how your website is looking for security, you can use things like Sucuri Site Checker. Sucuri is S-U-C-U-R-I. They're certainly one that I use amongst other tools, but they're quite good at helping pinpoint any issues, perhaps in the code itself. Hackers have become increasingly sneakier, and sometimes it's not evident from just looking at your website that there's a hack behind the scenes. So using tools like that is a really great way to weed out anything that may be hiding behind the scenes within the code itself. So those are the three main areas. And you're more likely than not probably already doing some of these, but with the Core Web Vitals update, it's just tightening all that and bringing everything together. So as I mentioned just on the slide there as well, page structure and content are going to continue being a really important factor. What you may have noticed recently in search is that alongside pulling up quotes of text, Google has now also started pulling up sections of pages that might be relevant to individual searches. So one way to do this and help Google pull your website content into search is to use what's known as a jump link. So you might have seen, if you're like me and you like Googling for recipes, you might have seen jump links being used in that kind of space. So what you'll often see is kind of at the very, very top, there's kind of your actionable buttons. So there'll be like a print or a jump to recipe, and that's how that jump link works. So it takes a section of your site that's perhaps, a section of the page that's perhaps further down, and it takes the user straight to that section. Really great thing to use if you're using blogs on your website as well, or if you've just generally got lots and lots of content on a page. If you introduce it at the start, use the jump link to that particular section, Google can then pick that up in search as well. So it does get more visitors coming to your site.